Welcome back to Operator Syndrome. I'm Steve Watkins, here for my second interview with David McDowell. If you've seen our last one, you kind of know where we're going. If you haven't, what we're talking about here is the world of Force Recon Marines. It's one of the things that came out of our previous episode. And if you haven't seen it, you might want to look at that one first. Not saying you have to, but it'd give you some background on David's story, the pipeline, and not tremendous depth on David's story. We're going to hopefully get into that today, but the pipeline and the differences between division recon and force reconnaissance, which is force reconnaissance in the Marine Corps is the highest level elite operators, analogous very closely to SEALs. I mean, when you get right down to it, we train. I can't think of another group in the military that trains as closely to Navy SEALs as Force Recon Marines. Waterborne commandos, airborne commandos. I mean, we can hit from a lot of different directions. We're trained to do a lot of the same things that overlap. And there's lots of stories behind those, that history. So just to like to start out by saying thank you, David, and welcome back to our show. And we're so thankful you've agreed to get into it.
Thank you. Thanks for having me back.
I'll say on Patrick's behalf and my own, our pleasure. It's any information we can get that's more accurate. It's not that ours wasn't accurate, but sometimes it's dated. Sometimes it's it just may be a little bit off. So we want to hear it from the horse's mouths, and also with that, Patrick's going to be doing some episodes coming up with other elite operators on the Army side of the fence. It seemed most natural for me to do David's interview because, like I say, the close connection. For one, I don't know what it's called, but the Marine Corps has always been a subset of the Navy. We work together, and a big 40,000 foot flyover level. We're both coming from maritime directions. Usually, Marines have always been the ones that go over the beach and take beaches and establish beachheads and come aground. So that most people know that, but and the Navy's providing them fire support. They're providing them hydrographic reconnaissance for their landing craft. So we've always been closely aligned. Let's say that. And more than that, doing many of the same missions. So the first thing I wanted to throw out to David, back in my day, so I'm late 80s, early 90s was my day. We pretty much the only show in town as far as the most elite Marine force, fighting force, surgical small unit fighting force was a force reconnaissance. And that's who I worked with. I trained with these guys pretty substantially. I mentioned some courses we went to, won't repeat that. But more recently, and I knew about this, I didn't know the timeline, and I didn't know quite the evolution of the process. We now have MARSOC, which is the Marine Special Operations Command. And these Marines, who are, if not 100% by and large force recon Marines, if I understand it right, they're adapting tactics. I mean, it's not really adapting tactics, but it's focusing on mission sets that we've needed in the last 20 years, going after bad guys. And they are part of what's called US SOCOM, United States Special Operations Command. They're down in Florida. Now that's like the mothership of a whole bunch of special operators: Army, Navy, Air Force, Marine Corps, Army, Navy, Air Force, and Marine Corps. Yeah, for Special Operations Wings, Air Force. Yeah. So anyway, there's a lot to that, and not to get bogged down in the weeds, but I just want to have David talk us through kind of how it's flowed from the old day, my days of just there was Force Recon, that was the group, and now MARSOC.
Right. So Force Recon was I guess, the premier special operations entity in the Marine Corps prior to MARSOC. I think the Marine Corps, I think SOCOM, I guess this was back in the late 80s when SOCOM was, I think it was 87 when SOCOM was established.
Right around
But
there.
around that time period, I think they tried to grab Marine Recon and integrate them into the command. But the Marine Corps naturally will resist. And I forgot what the reasoning, but in a nutshell, the Marine Corps thinks of itself as an elite entity anyway.
Yeah.
So, they have a history of having some kind of resentment of having some, an elite unit within an elite unit as they consider themselves. So, but there's more to it. It's not just because of that, but there's a lot of other red tape that was involved. But you fast forward to the early 2000s, after the invasion of Iraq, I guess there was a need to have the Marine Corps involved in SOCOM. So I believe it was in 2003, around that time. I may be wrong. I mean, there was some radar operators that can correct me later on, but I think it was in 03 that Force Recon was disbanded. So First Force, a lot of operators from First Force established what was called Detachment 1, Det 1, and that was the precursor to what is now as MARSOC. So it was I guess a proof of concept. They wanted to see if it would work. So they did a lot of I think they were attached to Naval Special Warfare at the time. So I think so Det 1 was attached to NSW. NSW was making decisions of what kind of missions they would get. From what I understand, talking to some of the old school Force Recon guys, but they needed to establish some kind of foundation. What would be their primary mission set and all that? So they have some guys, some Green Berets that came and I think it was Camp Pendleton where they was trying to develop their I guess training criteria.
Yeah.
So a lot of MARSOC's training criteria, their assessment and selection phase, and their sort of their Q course or their training is just like Army Special Forces assessment and selection and Q course. And the idea is that MARSOC operators, the raiders now, as they call them, they do a lot of foreign internal defense, FID, which is basically going out. Yeah, so going out into to another country, training up a local indigenous force to basically train them to fight their own war. Basically, that's what FID is. So that I think that was the primary mission set for MARSOC initially. So Force Recon at that time was non-existent. That name never existed through 2003 to I think was 2010, 11. By the time I went to basic reconnaissance course, they brought back Force Reconnaissance, but before that they just renamed it Deep Reconnaissance Company.
Isn't that interesting?
Yeah, so a lot of the experience from First Force Reconnaissance Company and Second Force Reconnaissance Company in Camp Lejeune, a lot of those experienced guys just left and went to Det 1 and then later on Marine Special Operations Battalion or INSOB. So we lost a lot of that talent, or at least Recon did. We lost a lot of that talent. And
where did they go? Where did all these guys go? Just back to.
So what they did was a lot of that talent, a lot of experienced Force Recon guys just went into forming MARSOC.
Okay.
So they were part of SOCOM now, and
right.
That's a lot of training, a lot of experience that left. And when you do that, and the Marine Corps is notorious for this, is when you disband a very specialized unit like that, and you want to reestablish them, you're going to have to start off from scratch. So you're going to have to vet. You're going to have a selection process to vet candidates, just like they do in BUDS.
Yep.
And take these guys that pass, the selection process, and then you got to train them up, and that takes years. You're looking at what, 10 years, I guess? I mean, what was like 6 to 10 years to be an experienced operator?
Oh,
that's
easy.
That's a lot of money and a lot of time.
Yeah.
Just to be an experienced operator.
Right.
So you're talking about that long to train somebody to be competent,
Yeah.
So that's the problem, and the Marine Corps is known for this. So
Yeah.
when Force Recon was brought back, that's basically what happened. And I heard there were like Marines and basic reconnaissance force just being filled in into Force Recon just so they can fill it up when they brought the name back. I don't know if
Wow.
that's true, but I've heard like Marines just going straight in, like fresh Marines from basic reconnaissance force after their jump school in the Sierra and all that, just going straight into Mars, Force Recon.
Wow.
But yeah, so from what I understand, talking to the older guys, that's been around your time frame, Force Recon is not really the same, not the same anymore. But now I think they're trying to. I mean, they go to a lot of schools now. I mean, we went through a lot of schools, but I guess they're trying to bring that back. The tempo of training and just the experience of be able to operate in small teams. Deep,
Gotcha.
Behind enemy lines, but
man, it's fascinating how, and now we're in another weird time because we're out of Afghanistan, we're pretty much out of Iraq, other than some special mission unit activity, right. And it's like, now what, and we keep we go through these setbacks, and I said I wasn't going to mention it, but I might mention it. There's a book called Water Beneath the Walls. It's by a guy, it's a SEAL, a former SEAL, The Rise of the Navy SEALs. But he talks extensively about the Marines going back to the original Raiders way back and how the Marines have had this history to which David alluded, where they'll disband. And it'll be like, man, you got to go back to brass tacks to try to recreate the force, and you lose a lot of experience and a lot of money and a lot of just kind of valuable. I mean, just the corpus of knowledge just kind of dissipates.
Well, that's what they did with the original Raiders in World War II.
Yeah, right.
They had a very high success rate in their missions. I mean, they were developing concepts in those times that was unheard of, like locking out of submarines.
Yeah,
they were actually locking out of submarines and launching from there. I mean, this was like stuff that was unheard of. But the Marine Corps had disbanded them in 1944, 1st Raider Battalion. Yeah, I think there were like 1st and 2nd Raider Battalions, but I know they disbanded 1st Raider Battalion. Mm-hmm. And they just rebranded them 1st Battalion, 4th Marines, and which was my old infantry battalion when I first came to the Marine Corps.
Right.
And I don't want to get too much off the subject, but I was the Marine Corps infantry battalions have what is called boat company, and a boat company does a lot of amphibious raids by doctrine. Prior to the Iraq War, there was a lot of doctrine on doing amphibious stuff. So a boat company would do amphibious raids. You'll go to Coxswain's course to learn how to navigate the Zodiac boats and whatnot. Yeah. My boat company was known as Alpha Raiders, and that was a tribute to the Raider battalions. Our guidon has the Raider symbol, everything. Right. So it's because of what the history of the Raider battalion, 1st Raider Battalion becoming 1-4. But yeah, the Marine Corps had disbanded it, and all those experienced guys that were in the Raider Battalion just became regular infantry. And there was no more. And I could imagine if the Marine Corps had left them alone, what kind of operators these guys would be today. Just like if the Navy had messed with the UDT. So like the war is over, we don't need UDT frogmen anymore. Yeah. Well, there would be no Navy SEALs.
No, right? No, absolutely would not.
So they left them alone, and you guys became who you guys are today.
Right.
Just a premier fighting force. You guys just kick ass, man. So
it's a really good parallel. I mean, parallel story. It's a good analogous story. Yeah, that's really fascinating. And yeah, I'm glad you went down that little avenue. One thing, and maybe because now this will make more sense since David has just explained that part of it. There's a little hate and discontent, maybe not a lot of hate, but some discontent with a name, the Raiders, being reappropriated for MARSOC.
Yeah,
in a different direction than it used to be. I mean, we're not pointing any fingers. We're just saying, I mean, they're kind of stealing some of your thunder.
Oh no, Yeah, there is. There's sort of some kind of controversy with the MARSOC taking the Raider namesake. Recon has lineage to the Raiders.
Right.
So, and MARSOC was formed by Recon Marines.
Sure.
So
there's some logic to it.
Within the community itself, having MARSOC take the Raider namesake, it's I don't want to get into too much into detail. And ruffle people's feathers, but there's some kind of hate and discontent with some of the old school operators that don't like that idea, especially the boat companies. We're talking about regular infantry Marines, but they're boat companies, and they've had that Raider namesake for a long time, especially my old company from 1-4, and just having them not be able to call themselves Raiders anymore is because now MARSOC takes that name.
Yeah, so and they do some hard ass training. Let's face it. I know that kind of training, cross over the horizon and landings and stuff like that. It's not easy stuff, but I get it. Well, turning the page a little bit, I wanted to throw it to you, David, and say, maybe just walk us through your first few deployments. Where'd you go and what did you do? And any significant standouts along the way?
You just want to get into my deployment with 2nd Recon, or just in deployments in general?
Yeah, 2nd Recon mostly, but yeah.
All right. Yeah. So my deployment with 2nd Recon was we went to Sangin Valley, but we relieved 1st Recon. It was November 2010 is when we went to Camp Leatherneck to relieve them. And 1st Recon had I guess they built a reputation with themselves with the Taliban because they were in Trek Nawa. There was a place in Sangin Valley called Trek Nawa. And there was a heavy buildup of Taliban fighters within that area. And basically, we went there to support 5th Marines. So 1st Battalion, 5th Marines, who were stationed out of Camp Pendleton. Basically, we were providing them intel, what Recon is, the eyes and ears of combatant commanders. So basically, we're providing them intel about their Taliban activities within the area. We did some direct action missions, working with local ANA, which is the Afghan National Army. So we're basically around Marja. There's another place called Zamin Dawa. What's the other place? So it's all throughout the Sangin Valley, which was around that time period was heavily Taliban presence there.
What province? Do you remember the province? Was that Wardak?
It's in Helmand Province.
Helmand Province. Okay.
Helmand Province. Yeah. So there's a reputation that 1st Recon had developed for themselves, and the Taliban knew who. Well, they didn't know that they were Recon, but they know that they were different from conventional Marines. Yes. They called them the Black Diamonds. So they were referring to the NVG mounts, the nods. So we wore a specific type of NVG mount. It was black and it looked like a diamond. And it kind of distinguished that kind of distinguished us from regular infantry Marines because they wore another type of NGV mount. So the Taliban would say, "Yeah, watch out for the Black Diamonds," and they were basically referring to their first Recon. So 1st Recon had developed a notorious, just an aggressive attitude over there. And so when we got relieved, that's the word we got. So so we did a lot of we did a lot of direct action. We got a lot of just really kinetic. That deployment for me was really kinetic compared to the other 2 deployments I did in Iraq, which is almost like a vacation compared to what was happening in Afghanistan. But we've done some operations where we disabled bridges. We carried explosives, demolitions out, sent them up at night, destroyed bridges so the Taliban couldn't complete their operations.
Good deal. I get that's one thing I picked up from, because this is none of my history, because I was already, I mean, other than serving as an officer later but I wasn't an operator at the time. I was a staff corps officer, but I served out at Dev Group for a while, and with some other SEALs. And I didn't have any idea of what the battlefield was like. I was an old Gulf War guy. I mean, just back in the old days. So, but one of the things I picked up from Patrick's story as well is that it would be, I mean, he did 5 rotations. I can't remember, 3 and 2, 2 to Afghanistan, 3 to Iraq, or vice versa. Patrick, forgive me if I can't remember what it was, but yeah. And he would say, some deployments, it was just like, kind of like nothing. I mean, like twiddling your thumbs. And the next thing would be like, wow, a lot of action, more kinetic, as you were saying. So
yeah,
that's really interesting. Let me throw this one to you. What why did you get out? Why did you decide to get out? And what year was that? Or you mentioned recruiting duty, did you?
no, no, I have done none of the recruiting.
Okay.
So I got out. So I left the Marine Corps in 2014.
Mm-hmm.
And primarily the reason why I left was I had some friends that went over on the contracting side. And they gave me some information. It's like, hey man, why don't you come over this way?
Yeah.
Make a lot of money.
But
they were retired, so they were receiving a pension. So they retired from the Marine Corps. They receiving a pension.
That's a little bit different.
Yeah. So basically that's, something for them to do, to get away from their wives. I don't know. I guess they still needed that rush.
Right.
Couldn't really leave the lifestyle, So, but anyway, they told me, hey, why don't you come down here and do some contracting? And that's what I did for 7 years.
Yeah. Oh wow.
But I was a sergeant E5 while I was in Recon, and I was in zone to pick up staff sergeant, which is E6. And some people would say that was kind of like a bad move. I picked up E-Sergeant. I definitely would have been in a gunnery sergeant right now in E7, and I would definitely be looking at retirement right now. I'll probably be getting my 20-year letter because I joined in 2006, and we're in 2023, and I'll be nearing my 20 years and looking at retirement if I wanted to.
Right.
And I know my father wasn't too happy when I left. He was like, "What are you doing? You just saying at your age, you're like in your mid-30s now. Why'd you leave the Marine Corps? You joined late. Why don't you just make that a career?" And I understand what he's coming from. 8 years to me is at the point where if you want to stay in or get out. If you're re-enlisted for another 4 years, you definitely should stay in. If you get out, then that's, unless you got some great job lined up.
Right.
Don't leave, because then you have at least a retirement coming in, health benefits,
the whole 9 yards.
Right. I didn't do that, so I left 2014, went to contracting. Never regretted it. I mean, I made a lot of money, and that money all went into investments and savings. So at least I made that worth it. Yeah.
Was it? I know Patrick and I have our kind of similar, our own slant. Like we just kind of we both were in about the same amount of time, Patrick and I. 6 years, 6-ish, I want to say. I don't know exactly for Patrick. I was exactly 6. And I mean, of all things, I had just been selected for Dev Group to go to Green Team on the East Coast. I was still Team 5. That's where I always served. And I was just kind of done with the military. I just kind of, there's so much stuff that I like got under my skin. I catch-22s, kind of political BS.
So you never retired then?
No, I never retired.
Oh, I thought you retired from the Navy.
Nope.
Oh, okay.
I did not. I got out. Yeah. And I got out in 93 as an active duty SEAL. And then I got a commission as a Navy chaplain in 2008. And was in for another 6 in the reserves. But I just did reserve time. And then once again, I got so fed up with the bureaucracy and the paperwork. I love the jobs and I love the military in one sense, but man, the butt kissing, and I just wanted to be out with the boys all the time doing the deed. And when I couldn't do that, and you got the other thing is I was in a relative time of peace after the Gulf War. I mean, it wasn't, that was 7 years, eight, no, it was 10 years before 9/11 or when the Gulf War ended. So it was almost like I'm going to move on to something else because there's just nothing going on. Had there been something going on, that'd been an interesting thing because I don't know. But for you, what ways were you kind of ready to move? I mean, was it money? I mean, you were being talked to by your buddies who were contractors and former operators.
Yeah, I really loved what I was doing in the Marine Corps. I mean, they were sending me to all kinds of training. I mean, I was just always busy. We were deployed, just doing that for deployments. But yeah, I mean, I felt like my career was going well. I mean, it's so experiencing both sides of the Marine Corps. Your infantry battalion, and then you have your reconnaissance communities, completely different.
Right.
Completely different. Yeah, my first 4 years in the Marine Corps sucked. It's a regular infantryman. I mean, to me, it was like, yeah, we did our training, we did our deployments, but I felt like it wasn't satisfying. It was just a lot of dumb games that we were playing and just a lot of bullshit. And I felt like I was getting nothing out of it.
Yeah.
And I was like 1 foot out the door, basically.
Yeah.
Until my friend convinced me to stay in and try Recon. He thought I'll be good with that, just based on my personality.
Yeah.
Got a pretty good ASVAB score because you got to have a pretty decent ASVAB score to get in there as well. And
yeah,
so I said, okay, yeah, that's what I did, and I'm glad I did it because it made me a better person.
Yeah.
And I'm saying that, I mean, I went to basic Recon course when I was 32 or something. I was old. And even at that age, I felt like I became a better man.
Yeah.
Because there's a lot of humility involved in that training.
Shoot, yeah.
A lot of humility. And I going into the battalions as a new guy, that made me even a better person. Just the mindset you gotta have to stay focused, and there's no fucking around. You're gonna be on time, show up for training, be on time, you're gonna do this, and this, and and that, to me, it builds character, and I liked it. I really did.
Yeah.
Just being around these type of guys who just want to better themselves.
Yeah.
Just as you experienced when you were in the SEAL teams, man, just way different. These people were just different, and I loved it. I love that mindset, and I should have stayed in, but I didn't. I wanted to go and try something else. I wanted to take those skill sets and bring it over into the private side. I did a lot of deployments contracting, both Afghanistan and Iraq. But that was an experience in itself.
Yeah.
And we could do a whole podcast on that, but
yeah.
Had a great time doing it. And I would be still doing it if COVID didn't hit, because COVID really screwed that up, man.
Did it really?
Yeah, it did. It I was downrange when that happened, when COVID was coming down.
Is that right?
2019.
That long ago. Yeah.
It wasn't that long ago. And U.S. State Department was like telling us, because they were about to close all the airports down. So a lot of the expatriates, ANSIPs, or American citizens that were traveling abroad, they were warning them, said, hey, you better, if you want to go home, you better fly back now because we're about to close the damn airports. So State Department was our company, and the U.S. government was trying to figure out whether or not if they're going to send us home or keep us on project. They asked me and a group of other guys if I wanted to stay on project. Like, sure. I said, I want to go back home. I want to stay out here, and eventually they did send us back home, and I'm glad they did, because because I flew into Dulles in DC and went to California to stay with my uncle in Los Angeles. 2 weeks after that, Dulles was just inundated with people. It was just freaking ridiculous watching that on the news. I'm glad I came home when I did. But
wow, yeah.
I mean, I would definitely be doing contracting right now. Just it's such a great time. It isn't really not feasible now. I mean, I'm employed by the federal government now, so
yeah,
I don't want to screw that one up. So
no, yeah.
yeah.
One of our angles with what we hope to speak to on whatever level is with operator syndrome. A lot of guys there's a lot of people are struggling. I mean, I've repeated this throughout the podcast and umpteen episodes, but veteran suicide rates are high, way too high. There is some data recently that they're starting to come back down, but nowhere near like, I mean, just to me, and this is just my opinion. I'm not speaking for our podcast, but it's just unbelievable to me that we've spent 20 years, America's best men and women downrange heroes and patriots, and we can't live I mean, struggling for a reason to go on day by day. That to me is obviously unsatisfactory. And I'll just say some of the toughest fighters I know, toughest war fighters you'll ever cross in this world are there. I mean, some are holding on, some are struggling, but this is something, I mean, I've seen it from all the branches of elite warriors. People are just not, they don't have, it's like there's this exhaustive reason to live that, yeah, I don't have any purpose anymore. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I do. Glad you brought this up because at work, so I work at Marine Corps Base Kaneohe, Hawaii, and it's at the Provost Marshal's office. And it's so Provost Marshals, it's military MPs. You have military and civilian counterparts there, and there's a special reaction team there. And one of those members there was a former Recon guy at 4th Force Reconnaissance Company. It's a reserve unit in Hawaii. And we both know a certain individual. I won't mention his name, but he was also a Recon guy, Force Recon, and later on joined the Army under the 18 X-ray program to become Special Forces. Became a 18 Bravo, went to selection, Q course, graduated, and became an 18 Bravo, which is a weapons sergeant. Stud. This guy's a stud. Mentally tough, physically tough, smart, just a badass operator.
Yeah.
Never thought in a million years that this guy would just take his life, and I found out that he did. And he took his life like 2 or 3 years ago, and I didn't know this until I spoke to this individual, and he's like, "Yeah, he offed himself, man." I'm like, why do these guys do that? I don't know what was going into his brain housing group when he did it. He had a wife, he had kids, he had something to look forward to. I don't know. I can't speak to it. The only thing that I could probably tie in here is that a lot of these operators, especially these tier 1 guys, they do a lot of breaching. They're heavily involved in like training that involves explosives. They go down range. They're just at the tip of the spear, and a lot of these being exposed to explosions, it's not good for your brain, right? So a lot of these guys got TBI. So it's like NFL players. So you get hit in the head long enough, you're going to damage your brains. So I'm thinking like, for these type of guys who train at that level and deploy at that level, their brains are damaged, and I think it's because of that. It's the symptoms that they experience that they just, I guess they can't continue on.
Yeah.
It changes your personality. It changes your mindset. So I think that's part of it. And I heard that taking psychedelics at low dosages, like medicinally, it helps over time. So there's a lot of investment in that. And You guys have a like I don't know if when you're in, but when you leave the SEAL teams,
Mm-hmm.
when they medically check you out, then didn't they don't they have a clinic that what's it called? I don't know. I forgot the name.
Nico.
NICO. There you go.
Yeah.
So I was talking to a former team guy. He was telling me about NICO,
Yeah.
and today they're actually investing in that type of therapy.
Yeah. Yeah.
What?
That's some good stuff. And that's, thanks for saying that for our listeners, because for one thing, it's a whole ball of wax. If you're out there and you're listening to this and you just stumble upon it and you're struggling, there is a clinic. If you're a veteran and you've been exposed to a lot of breaching, you may know about it, but it's called the NICO, National Intrepid Center. I can't remember what the O stands for. It's at Walter Reed,
Yeah.
and they're doing all kinds of cutting edge. A very close friend of mine, SEAL Tier 1 operator, he said it saved his life. He said to me, to my face, he said, "Nico saved my life." He was losing his shit because of all the concussive pressures. We're just finding out how bad. I mean, we always know, yeah, it's not good to get hit in your head, and it's the repetition of these concussions, like over time,
Yeah.
many,
Yes.
many, many, that is really causing a lot of damage and a lot of hurt. And guys are waxing themselves, like, and there's another episode, just tangentially, watch watch the episode on the Sean Ryan show with DJ Shipley, if you haven't seen it. DJ Shipley, I mean, you don't get any more intense than that. And just to listen to his story, I think him being honest and telling his story opened up a lot of doors for veterans who are struggling, because they were like, whoa, that guy was struggling with that. And one of the problems with alpha male high level operators on all these different units is you don't want to show weakness. You don't want to say, man, I'm hurting. I'm having fucked up thoughts. Because you want to be tough. You want to, it's a game you play, but it's like,
Right.
guys, who's winning here? No, we go down range and we kill a lot of bad guys, but it's like, if we're not being honest with each other, and if we're not just saying, look, it's okay just to break down and to say, I need help.
Yeah.
It
I
to
think
me,
that's
that's the greatest tragedy. Yeah.
yeah. That's the key. That's a good point. There is a lot of alpha maleness in special operations. And like I said, it's like, if you can't do it, get out of the way. So there's got to be a point where you have to admit that, I need help and I'm vulnerable right now. And it takes a lot. I know it takes a lot, but that is the key point, is like,
Mhm.
if you need help, don't be afraid to ask for help and reach out to someone. And there's a lot of resources out there for you to get help.
Yeah.
And there's no reason for someone to take their life, So
No way. No way.
yeah.
Well, I just kind of wrapping up here. There's a lot of help out there. Just want to throw that out for guys who are listening, and gals. If there's no shame in just saying I'm hurting. I sat in a funeral after a mass casualty, the largest mass casualty in naval special warfare history, and I'm told in Afghanistan, in OEF. And I saw the baddest mofos on the planet bawling their eyes out, and it was a good thing. I'll never mention names on this show other than in a laudatory way, but that really had a big effect on me. And so anyway, hang in there. And there is help out there. Just reach out. The VA's trying to do a lot to help, and just be open, be real. It's not, you don't have to, it's not, being a tough guy doesn't mean, not opening up and kind of offing yourself, or doing that, going down that road.
I think there should be more dialogue within the teams too. If there's another teammate suffering, there should be dialogue. Like, if it's like, hey brother,
Yeah.
let's take some time to talk. You need some help. that comes down to leadership too.
For sure.
Yeah, it's just taking care of your people, man. You know, and there's a lot of good leaders. I'm pretty sure in the SEAL teams there were good leaders that recognized that. There are some that weren't.
Yeah.
So but it's that. It is that. If you're a leader, you see someone that you're subordinate, whatever, you need to go talk to that person.
Yeah.
Just kind of down a little bit and see what's happening. Just get involved in their lives, man.
Yep. And so if it helps you out there, if it's coming from a Force Recon Marine and a Navy SEAL, and hey, I've been in holes before, and I'll just admit it. I had to go to therapy, and it got me out of some holes, and I'm better for it. So there is hope. So David, wrapping up, man, thank you so much. I know our listeners will enjoy it, and I'm honored to have had the privilege to interview you, and appreciate your coming on the show.
I'm honored to be on your show. It was a privilege. Enjoyed my time with you, and thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you. Aloha, and may I say semper fi.
Huya.
All right.
Wow.
Peace, brother.
Thank you. Yeah, you too. Have a good one.
Ciao.
Yep.